Welcome to the Bitcoin Infinity Show, brought to you by Bitbox, Stampseed, the Bitcoin Advisor, and ShoppingBit. Go to bitcoininfinity.com for books, merch, and more. Enjoy the conversation.
Thanks. Welcome for the first time to the Bitcoin Infinity Show. Incredible.
Yeah. So one of the first things, you have made the best book recommendations to me that I've ever gotten from anyone. And one was The Ethics of Liberty by Murray Rothbard, and the other one was Economic Science and the Austrian Method by Hans Hermann Hoppe. Yeah. And now you recommended another book, which I haven't read yet, called which Grafton from Wexel also recommended to me, which is called The Lodging of Wayfaring Men.
Yeah.
And what is that book about, and why do you recommend it so much?
It's a beautiful book. It's really incredible, and it's written for us, right, for Bitcoiners, but it's over 20 years old. It was written in like 1997 to 2002, in that time period, and it's loosely based on real events, which is fascinating. And the book is crazy. It goes about a group of cypherpunks who are building a anonymous marketplace, and the first attempts of an anonymous digital currency. And again, this shit really happened, and the story is quite wild. With the freedom tech being built for very good reasons, and people who understood the philosophical impact and the deep reasons for why freedom is important. So they were very motivated and dedicated to make the world a better place in their lifetime. And so they got their shit together and got organized and built something incredible, right? And it took them a couple attempts. And eventually they rolled it out and enabled people to trade, right, to do their business online, in cyberspace, and encrypted. And so that made a lot of people very happy because, you get to live life free and undisturbed. So it got adopted by many users. So much so that eventually the government started to notice that somehow they're making less tax revenue than before. And something's a bit fishy, and then they started to investigate, and, the NSA and FBI put decent amount of people on the topic and try to de-anonymize the users of these services and infiltrate them. So the story is about this whole clash between the first and second realm, people who build freedom tech and people who enslave others, and how those two worlds kind of clash. So it's quite fascinating, and it's a book that's very inspiring.
What was the website called?
This is the author's name is Paul Rosenberg. Originally, this book was published anonymously, right? And years later, when it was a bit safe to talk about this or associate their actual name with this, he did. He was he's like a teacher, basically, an electrical engineer's teacher. He wrote like 30 books or something on that subject, and is a very eloquent and practiced writer, but also a hardcore cypherpunk and freedom lover, and very well read and very well writing, or he can write extremely well. So he has the freemansperspective.com is his newsletter. You can go back, it's going for, 10, 20 years or something. And every week there's one or two short pieces of articles that he writes. And this book is actually also includes some writings that he did in the past and published. And so it's somewhat a collection of his thought. And so The Lodging of Wayfaring Men is a fiction book, right? Like in essence, right? It's basically a fictionalized story with, character arcs and such. So it's not a technical book, but the author is very technical, and he understands cryptography and how to apply it. He understands distributed networks and like laying fiber optic cables and stuff like this. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of real computer science in this fictional world. And that makes it quite applicable to today, where we're surrounded with cryptography much more than at the time when this book was written.
Super cool. So, all right, bit of a jump here, but why is avoiding paying taxes the most altruistic thing you can do in life?
This is actually one thing that gets covered in the book.
I suspected that was the case.
Because there's, and this is also why this book is so interesting to recommend to newcomers to this philosophy, because at the beginning, not everyone is convinced that this is a good idea, right? Even the creators of this technology are don't know the end result and how other people will use this tech. Right? There's a lot of ambiguity there. And so this book follows characters who reason through these very difficult questions. Right? Like, for example, I'm going to spoil this book a bit, but everyone should read it anyway. So there's one character who is a lawyer, right? And he works together with an ex-FBI agent, who both of them share this common like seeking of justice, like real justice, to stop bad guys from doing bad things to good people, right? And the ex-FBI guy is somewhat got disillusioned with the institution of the FBI to actually provide and establish justice. So now he is somewhat like walking this line in between the institution and the actual like free realm vigilante justice, basically. And he then when thinking of this case and like, should I, like, is there a wrong being done by the FBI trying to stop this project, right? Or is this project actually good? Right? Do they have justice in doing what they do? Then he reasoned of is the avoidance of taxation evil, and of course then walks through the reasonable steps of thinking. If two people transact voluntarily, both people are better off after the trade than before, right? Both people are happy, both say thank you and shake hands. That's trade. That's the market, right? And then you have coercion, right? Where one guy says, give me that. And the other says, no, actually, I don't want to give you that. But the guy hits him and takes it anyway. Right? So that means afterwards that the guy who stole it is obviously better off. He's happy, right? He got the thing. But the guy who was the victim was being stolen from is worse off, right? So humans have the capacity to do mutually beneficial things, right? To literally create value, make both of us better off than we were before, right? And we also have the potential to destroy value and take from others. And one is beneficial and fosters the growth of civilization, and the other destroys it. And so, avoiding being stolen from is a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah, reminds me of one thing we go into in the new book about the difference between lawful and legal. I don't remember the name of the guy now, but some Dutch libertarian thinker who emphasized on the terms that made the point that something being lawful is like lawful in an ethical sense, like the basis in don't steal, whereas legal is the top-down government-imposed legal framework, and how the two don't always align, or rather, they almost never align.
Yeah, this is the difference between natural law and man-made law.
Exactly.
Right? A natural law is one that is universal, right? Across time and space, it's always present, and it's immutable. It cannot be changed, right? At least not by us. And physics, for example, like is a natural law, and arguably there is a natural law to ethics as well, and specifically as morality increases, freedom increases, and as morality decreases, freedom decreases. That's the law of gravity in the ethical realm, and that man didn't make it, right? We just realize it because it is what it is. And then we have man-made law on the other hand. This depends on a certain territory. Right? The law in the US is different from the law in Russia. And it also depends on time. And the American law in the 1700s is very different from what it is today. And so there are these imaginary lines where these rules apply, and there's other places or times where they do not apply. So they're arbitrary, right? And on a whim. And so they can be designed, to the benefit of some and at the expense of others. And that is ultimately what politics is about.
Yeah, I think this is one of the key points that quote unquote normies have such a hard time wrapping their head around natural law, and like what makes don't steal a natural law. Like what is the very foundation of libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism or absolute property rights or whatever you may call it, consensualism. And to my understanding, it has to do with homesteading. If you're the first person that acquired something, then no other person has a right to take that away from you. But and you can logically deduct your way to that being true. Like, what's your view on that, and what's your understanding of that, and how would you explain that to a layman?
Well, the reality is such that we have limited scarce resources, right? If we have one piece of steak on the table and three guys who are hungry, like, some are gonna go home on an empty stomach, right? We literally don't have enough food to feed us all, right? And one piece of something can only be used by one person at one time, right? We cannot duplicate one piece of steak into many and satisfy everyone. So this is a natural part of reality, right? That's just how things are, you know? So there's a potential of conflict over who gets to allocate these scarce resources. And there's a couple solutions to it, right? That have been proposed. Like, one would be like, nobody owns it, right? Nobody gets to eat it because it's natural and it's not part of your body, so don't touch it, right? But then we die. You know, all of
that's
us.
the problem with that. Yeah,
That's kind of a problem.
yeah. One could view that as a problem. Yeah.
So let's rule that option out. Another solution is, of course, we all own it, right? And we all like get to use it. But I mean, that doesn't really work either, right? Because sure, we all own it, but who actually gets to eat it, right? Because there's 3 different mouths and the food only goes into one of them. So, you know, we can't all actually own something if we cannot all use it, right? It is limited and only a few can use it. So everyone owns it isn't the solution to the problem, right? Because everyone cannot own it because there's not enough for everyone. So again, that's an issue. Ultimately, again, we all starve, right? We can't really make decisions on this. Another option would be we vote, right? We somehow, you know, pick who gets to allocate these resources. But then, I mean, we're 8 billion people. How are we all gonna vote on who gets the stake, right? Like, that's gonna be impractical. Like, how are we even communicate all 8 billion of us to get together in a vote, right? So again, until we have the result of the vote, nobody eats the steak, so we all starve again. It's not really a good solution either, right? And then we have one option that a small subset of the people gets to make the choice of you know, how to allocate these resources, and we can just pick them, you know, vote for them, for example. But here again, now other people are allocating the resources for others, right? Like, and some bureaucrat 100 kilometers away is not gonna know like who of us is vegetarian and doesn't want the meat, right? And that just means that someone who's far off doesn't have the knowledge to actually allocate the resources in a proper manner. And that leads to misallocations, right? We starve again because the guy who doesn't want the meat gets it and then it rots. And the guys who would actually like it never get access to it and they starve, right? So that's the fundamental problem of socialism, basically, of some priest class allocating the resources for others. So again, the solution doesn't work either. So we're not left with much. But one thing that seems to work is private property rights, right? Again, as you said, right, the person who creates something, the butcher, right, or like the farmer who raised the cow and can now decide what to do with it, right? Does he butcher it himself? Does he sell it to a butcher? So the person who created something gets to own it, right, and gets to decide how to allocate this. And then he has the right to either consume it himself or to abdicate the consumption of this good. So to say, I won't use it, I will trade it, I will give it to you, right? And he can make it a gift, right? Just say, here, have the entire cow. Like, I like you, I like your family, I'm happy that you're happy, right? Great, that's possible, right? Or of course, he would want something from you in return, like give me a bar of gold, or a bushel of wheat or something else. And so meaning, we now have a way that we can allocate resources in a clear, simple rule set, right? The person who created it can decide what to do, and he can have a contractual agreement to transfer this ownership to someone else. And so the people who actually have the problem now have the power to allocate the resources to solve those problems. and not some guy far away, but just you and me who created stuff.
Yeah, and as you said, this only applies to scarce resources. So what would be an example of a resource where you could eat the steak, but I could have it too? And the thing that comes to mind is information, of course.
Yeah.
So can you own information?
No, like, because that doesn't really make sense, right? To own means to allocate, how to allocate these, to decide how to allocate these resources, right? And then that's a solution to a problem of a lack of resource allocation, right? Or for a lack of resources that need to be allocated, rather. But with information, there is no lack. Like, if I have a PDF, I can copy it to you, and I can send it to you, and I can send it to 100 other people, and I still have the exact same high-fidelity version of the information that I shared with others. And of course, it's the same with words, right? The words that I speak, they are not lost on me, right? I still retain them and the information that they represent. And that means we don't need to, like, be stingy with information. We can give it to everyone. And it doesn't degrade the quality. Quite on the contrary, right? If without information, there is no production, right? Like, imagine yourself on an island, and you have all the raw materials, all the machinery, like everything there, but you don't know anything about physics, right? Or material science, or just like production stages of how to build things. If you don't know any of that, the raw material is worth nothing to you, nothing, right? Because you don't know how to allocate, how to shape this raw material into other things so that it actually solves your problems in the end, right? So that's, we need information in order to produce things, right? That's the theory behind it, right? The blueprints, so to say. But the cool thing is, we don't have to be stingy with the blueprints. We can give every human on this planet equal access to all of the information that we as humans have accumulated, and now all of a sudden you will never be stranded on an island not knowing how to do something, because you can just look it up in the grand database of accumulated human knowledge. And of course, technology has made that much more like possible and low cost. Right? Back in the day, in order to share an information, you needed to speak verbally to it, right? So you're limited to time and space, or you need to scratch it on some stone or clay or write it on a piece of paper, but it's all quite expensive. And then still you have the scarcity of the paper, right? There's only one book and there's 100 people who want to read it, right? So again, information is limited, and it is a scarce resource, not because the information itself is limited, but because the medium of the information is scarce. And that was a big tragedy, that we were never able to communicate at a large scale and remember these conversations and easily access them until the cypherpunks who came up with computers, right? And realized that we can build this realm of information that is so cheap to transfer and store information that we can just basically do it for free for anybody, for 8 billion people. And then all they need is a rather cheap form of silicon and like nicely arranged. But of course, people try to hold on to the protection schemes that extract money from others and capital from others. And nation states have enforced intellectual property rights and patents and such. And that just harms people. It doesn't bring forward the best out of humanity, and that's a big shame.
Now, very well put. This has been Praxeology 101 with Max Hillebrand.
Great news, everyone! Bitcoin, the Inverse of Clown World, is out now.
It's the successor to Everything Divided by 21 Million, and it's based on the last 2 years of podcasts that we've done together. So if you like the show, you're going to love the book.
Find the book on bitcoininfinitystore.com or on Amazon.
That's right. We have our own store now, bitcoininfinitystore.com. You can find not just books, but merchandise based on Everything Divided by 21 Million, the Inverse of Clown World. That's bitcoininfinitystore.com.
So check out Bitcoin, the Inverse of Clown World today and buy some other stuff while you're there too.
This show is brought to you by Bitbox, our favorite hardware wallet. It's Swiss engineered and has all the most important security features to keep your Bitcoin safe, while keeping a user experience that even your grandma can use. So visit bitbox.swiss/freedom to learn more, or use code FREEDOM at checkout for 5% off. And remember, it's the BitBox 02 Bitcoin Only edition. Make sure to get that Bitcoin Only firmware.
Bitbox, 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 Bitbox.
Where I want to follow up here is How does this apply to Bitcoin? Because Bitcoin is only information. So how can anyone theoretically ever own a Satoshi? Do you really own it, or what is it?
Yeah, what is it? Like, what is actually a Satoshi? Look into the Bitcoin code base. There is no such thing as a Satoshi. Right? A transaction has a field that is an integer, right? But it's just an integer. It doesn't even have a unit associated to it, right? So it's just a number. Satoshis are just numbers in a database. And you don't own the number 270,000 just because you have 270,000 Bitcoin. Right? The actual number of Satoshis, no, you don't control them, right? You don't own them. But information has another interesting thing that cypherpunks realized, right? That once, like when you have a secret, right, then you can choose to share it with others, right? But and then once you've shared it with one person, however, you cannot control what that person does with the information. He can keep it secret for himself, or he can tell it to the entire world. And so there is such a thing as giving access rights to information. Right? And this is an important part in cryptography and in Bitcoin, of course. Right? Our secret keys should be secret, privately kept just for us. Because if you do share your secret key publicly, then all of a sudden anyone can sign messages with this private key and therefore spend Bitcoin in the transaction chain of Bitcoin. And well, that's a critical part of it. So Bitcoin basically relies on keeping information occulted, hidden from others, in order to ensure that we, again, solve, like, basically Bitcoin is just a piece of software, right? So it is non-scarce information, but it wants to be money, and money needs to be scarce, right? Because if I can spend a bar of gold first to you and then the same bar of gold later to you, we have infinite inflation, right? The money system just dies. So scarcity is required. It's a required feature for money, and digital money therefore requires digital scarcity. And so what Bitcoin does is it establishes a set of computer code that defines the access right to certain chunks of money, so to say. Right? And the chunks of money are Bitcoin UTXOs, right? Unspent transaction outputs. And the spending condition, so to say, or like the rule how to allocate this money, who gets to decide where this money goes next, is defined by a script, right? A small computer program that evaluates either to true or to false, depending what input you provide. And so the script is the lock, and usually it's a single public key. And then the way to prove that you're actually authorized to spend this coin is by creating a valid witness, the input to the script, to the program that returns it to true rather than to false. And usually, again, that's a signature of a single private key over the transaction structure that they're actually spending the money. So Bitcoin's genius realization is that we just all have to check every transaction of everyone else. And when we do that, then we can be sure that for one, nobody's being stolen from, right? That nobody is like losing access to his money, that someone is spending the money with a wrong signature. He doesn't have the private key, he cannot produce a valid signature, but so we have to make sure that such a transaction does never make it into the blockchain, right? That's the first important aspect. And the second is we want to ensure that there's no inflation, right? Because if we can just create as many tokens as we want, then the value of the token goes to the marginal cost of production. If we can produce a token with the click of a button, then the marginal cost of that token, or the value of that token, will be zero, right? So we need to make it, difficult, or in fact, in Bitcoin, impossible to create additional units. There's 21 million and that's it, right? That's the set of rules. And therefore, when we check each transactions, we also ensure that there is no transaction that has 1 Bitcoin on the input side and 10 Bitcoin on the output side, therefore increasing the total supply of Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin is a massive verification machine to ensure that this computer system, this way of speaking to each other, actually balances the books of how many units of money are there and who has the right to allocate these. And so it's basically a system that creates a natural resource and then also manages the allocation of this natural resource. So Bitcoin is almost a parallel universe where, in fact, you do own the Bitcoin, basically, right? In the specific bubble, so to say. But the ownership is not defined by you as a person. It's defined by the knowledge of a secret.
Yeah. So you prove that you have access to it by having access to the private key,
Yes.
which unlocks it. So is there anyone else on Earth that can prove that you own a Bitcoin except you, the holder of the private key? In theory.
Yes, if the holder of the private key reveals information to others that indicates such, right? And like one very common way that this would be is you have a mobile wallet, that it does not run a Bitcoin full node, right? That connects to someone else's full node to check if you have Bitcoin, right? And you don't use Tor, right? So there's an IP address linked from you to the server. And so the server operator knows that this IP address just asked how much money is on this address. And so we have, a very strong indication, right, that this IP address owner owns this address.
This is at the core of the question. It can be very strong indication.
Yeah.
But in my mind, it can never be proof, because you need to sign with the actual private key to prove. Otherwise, it's boating accident time.
The guy with the gun doesn't need proof, right?
No.
He just needs a good enough guess. For him, he needs, like, there is a praxeology to violence, right?
Yeah.
Thieves are actors, right? They live in a state of uneasiness, they have problems, and they try to find a solution to that problem. And they don't have ethics, they don't have morals, and so their solution to the problem harms other people, right? But nevertheless, they are still actors. And so they think that they will be better off after the action of theft than before. Right? That's a value judgment. And it's an entrepreneurial one. So they might be correct, they might not. Right? They break into a house hoping that there is a bar of gold hidden under the couch, right?
Yeah.
Turns out there's not, right? So if they spend a lot of money breaking into the house and there's no loot, right, they're not profitable thieves. And this means that they destroyed their capital, right? They spend 10 Bitcoin on getting the equipment and they got 0 Bitcoin back, right? So that means they're 10 Bitcoin poorer and eventually they will run out of money and starve, right? So thieves need to be profitable in order to do their thieving. And that's the genius that cypherpunks realized. If we exponentially increase the cost of attack and exponentially decrease the cost of defense, then we make thievery unprofitable, right? And that's the genius of private public key cryptography and encryption, right? It's trivial to generate a private key and then generate this public key or a signature, right? Second compute, like nothing, right? But to brute force a private key or to forge a signature without it, like requires more energy that would collapse into a black hole, So that's kind of a problem. And for thieves, right, it's really good for the people who want to defend themselves because they can very cheaply do it. And it just doesn't make sense to actually attempt to break the encryption. But nevertheless, computer systems are very complex and there's a lot of metadata associated with computing and communicating between computers. And so, there are microphones and radio frequency scanners that you can point on computers and you see the computation that's happening in the machine, right? Because there's a lot of radiation outside of the computer that can be correlated to which bits are being flipped here. And then you can have all types of side channel attacks to extract secrets from a computer while it's running. And so the problem is that the technologies, the holistic technology stack that we have is quite susceptible to revealing information that should have been kept secret. Right? And again, that is a critical part, of course, to communication encryption, but even more so for Bitcoin. Right? If we lose the assurance that only we know the private key, the money system is broken. And that's why Bitcoiners were so paranoid and started this whole thing of hardware wallets and secure elements to really ensure that we don't leak private key material. But it's an extremely difficult task because, this reality is very observable and the cards are to some extent quite in favor of surveillance, unfortunately.
Yeah, the guy with the gun in this case could be the government, doesn't necessarily have to be.
Yeah, exactly. It can just be a poor guy who needs to provide for his children, and he sees a way for feeding his family for the next 2 years. And that's a good trade-off for him.
Yeah, momentarily.
Momentarily, exactly. Right?
If we manage to do this though on a grand scale, and if people in general manage to do it, to have the to exponentially increase the cost of the attack while simultaneously decreasing the cost of defense, does that lead to world peace at one point? Is that like the end goal?
Yeah, I think so.
Could it?
Oh, I mean, that makes sense. If every economically rational thief will realize that he is worse off if he does the stealing, all right? Like actually, because he needs to spend much more money in an attempted theft, and most likely he's not going to succeed, right? And I mean, this exponential difference has to be huge, though, right?
Yeah.
Because like we had castles, you know, like castles are quite extreme asymmetric protection, right? Like if you're behind castle walls with a well-staffed militia that actually defends the walls, it's quite difficult to get to you if you just have, you know, like humans and swords and ladders. That's like sieges are quite in the favor of the defender, but still they happened a lot, right? And people were able to overcome these defenses because I guess they weren't never holistically secure. You know, there was always some backdoor that enabled the attacker to get through, right? And that might just be brute force. Right? You just bring a huge army and you're fine with tens of thousands of your own guys getting killed. But eventually, you know, after you throw a couple 100,000 people at the problem, someone will succeed to break through. Quite a brutal tactic, obviously, but it worked. Right?
You upgrade your RAM and you get in.
Yeah. But then cryptographers came around and were like, well, but there's math.
Yeah, we can use RAM in another way. Like
and like, you know, like 1 + 1 is 2. Like,
what? Are you sure?
That's yeah. That might be offensive.
That's a different kind of worms. Continue.
Yeah. So Bitcoin being this perfect defense mechanism because all it does is increase the cost of the attack. Can Bitcoin ever be used for attack, in your opinion? Like, can it be used in an aggressive way?
I think directly not. Because again, it is just speech and such. But on the other hand, maybe yes. Because let's say like if someone hacked your machine, right, and got access to your private key and spends the Bitcoin, like in the context of Bitcoin itself, it's a valid signature, it's a valid transaction, and it will be included. So in the legalities of Bitcoin, it is no theft, right? It is a valid transaction. But let's say on the ethical realm, right? Like you worked hard to get these Bitcoin and you didn't want to send them to the attacker, right? So he is definitely stealing them from you. So let's say Bitcoin can be stolen, certainly, in the human analysis, right? Not on a technical level. We've never seen a transaction confirmed with an invalid signature, but on the human level, there have been a lot of people that got separated from their Bitcoin against their will, right? Against their consent, and that is theft. So thieves can use Bitcoin. Thieves can get paid in Bitcoin. Thieves can take your Bitcoin and pay them to themselves, right? That's a fact of reality too.
Yeah. So what if, say for instance, this is an example out of thin air, but if you had a money printer and you were able to store arbitrary data next to this unitless Satoshis, and thereby increasing the cost to starting up a node for everyone, and thereby decreasing decentralization, and finally breaking the network when there aren't enough nodes. Could that be used in an aggressive way?
Well, that's difficult to say, right? Because again, it is just the writing of bits and bytes, right? It's just speaking words. So there's, however, again, a limited amount of resources that are available specifically in Bitcoin. But not just do we have 21 million Bitcoin, we also have like 2.5/4 megabyte blocks, right? So this means there's only a certain number of transactions that can be fit into a single block. and that means we have, again, a scarce resource, and we need to allocate it. So this is why there's a price for Bitcoin transactions, because that's how we solve the scarcity problem, right? By whoever pays the most gets in. Or it's not even whoever pays the most. It's like you can choose who goes in by mining a block, right? You have full freedom of choice of which transaction do you include into your block. If you don't mine, right, then you can propose to someone else, say, please include my transaction into a block. But again, there's a large demand and a limited supply. So most likely people will start bribing each other. And it's like, if you include my transaction in your block, I'll give you sats. Right? And in fact, the Bitcoin software launched with a anonymous peer-to-peer marketplace for the scarce good, which is block space. Right? And it had a payment mechanism integrated into the Bitcoin transaction system itself, which, by the way, was not a requirement. Satoshi didn't have to do that, right? Bitcoin would have totally worked if you could not, like, if every input sum has to be exactly equal to every output sum. Right? There cannot be that outputs are smaller than inputs and the leftover goes to the miners. There could have been a consensus rule, right? But then most likely we would have seen some third-party external marketplace where people would do the bidding on please include my transaction into the block. And then, of course, they would have to figure out how do we actually pay the miner to get our transaction in the block when the payment transaction will, again, have to be included in the block, right? So it would be quite difficult. So Satoshi had the genius to embed an anonymous marketplace into the core essence of the protocol, right? With the rule that outputs can be smaller than inputs, and the rule that we have this gossip peer-to-peer network, which, like, the whole peer-to-peer network is kind of optional, by the way, but it's just there to kind of make it easier, so that we have this anonymous marketplace for block space that we can propagate offers, right? And one person sends the offer and gets spread to the entire network, right? From like the demand side is no monopoly, right? Anyone can broadcast a message to the peer-to-peer network hoping to be included, right? And then on the supply side, the actual miners, there's also no monopoly. Anyone can spin up his computer and start SHA-256 hashing on the most recent chain, right, with his own candidate block, and nobody can stop you, right? That's the definition of no monopoly. New market participants are not hindered to enter the system, right? So this is the most radical free market that we've seen probably ever, and it's been kind of hidden inside Bitcoin since the very beginning.
Yeah, you can of course also pay the miner in something else than sats to get included into a block. And if a mining pool does this, the individual miners doesn't necessarily have a claim to a piece of the pie of whatever money was paid to the mining pool owner under the table and not on the system, right? They can't even see it. So how big of a problem is that? And or can you really, the core of the question is, can you really call yourself a miner if you're just selling hash power to a pool and the pool isn't transparent?
I mean, it's actually true that there could be in the future a alternative marketplace for block space that's not inside the Bitcoin Core client, right? And by the way, arguably that's better. Because we have a piece of software that does one thing really well, and then, we just specialize and put the two modules together. Architecturally speaking, this might be better. We see things like, for example, the mempool.space explorer or accelerator, right, is one marketplace that is now establishing that seems to work, quite well. Of course, it has the issue of there's a central order book, so to say, and probably custodian for the money as well. And so I'm not sure, but it's one approach of doing such an alternative marketplace. And there can be downsides. Like here, it's not really public of how much volume is going through here, right? Like how much are people speeding up their transactions, right? And I guess the same goes to much earlier where we just had mining pools offering this in their own API, or web page. So at least now, we have a dedicated service provider that's not a mining pool doing this, which I think is an improvement. But we could also, build a off-chain peer-to-peer network, so to say, that's not related to Bitcoin per se, but that has all of the aspects that we want, just dedicated for an optimized market book for this resource. And Bitcoin should still work, I think. Like the marketplace inside Bitcoin Core is not essential. In the long run, it was just very convenient to bootstrap it. But, in 50, 100 years, I wouldn't be surprised if we have dedicated systems for these things that potentially are in different repositories and such, different softwares.
So in your opinion, how damaging is a temporary fee spike over a weekend or something where it goes up to like 2,000 satoshis per transaction? What impact does it have on Lightning channels and Lightning providers and so on? Like, do you consider it an attack, or what is it?
It's an inevitability almost, right? If you have a hard, extremely limited supply, right? There is only 2.5 megabytes in the usual block, right? And you have extremely fluctuating demand, and there's no way to speed up production of the good, right? So there is bound to be extreme, differences of we have way more demand than supply, or way less, right? But it will be very rare that we will fill just exactly everyone who wanted to gets in. That's quite rare, I think. So that's why we've seen in, I don't know, since how long is the mempool full now? Like probably a couple months at least, right? So to actually clean out every transaction that wanted to be made is quite rare already now. And in the future, if Bitcoin continues to be used, this is even more unlikely, right? So then the question is just how, do you get into the top payers to get included in the block still? And this is where just the technology is quite difficult, because this is like it's an order book, right? You're trading basically, and you don't know if the price goes up or price goes down. And this is all at least supposed to be automated, right? So like Bitcoin wallet developers are basically building trading bots, right? They're block space accountants charged to purchase block space on behalf of the user. And then the user just clicks send and that's it. And the software does all of the complexities of constructing a transaction that is of a size acceptable, right? Because if fees are super high, you don't want to build a transaction with 100 inputs and one output, right? That's quite big, quite expensive. You would want to have a transaction with one input, one output. It would be way cheaper if the fee spike is currently high. Right? So a smart robot should build a different structured transaction with more or fewer inputs and outputs to accommodate the current fluctuation of the market. And of course, the fee rate is another. Like, what's actually your bid that you put into this marketplace? And that's trading. Like, how much are you going to pay for the stock? Nobody really knows, right? And so it's kind of good luck, and you don't know if it goes up or goes down. And sometimes you overpay, right? And you pay way more than was actually needed to get into that block. And so you lose money, you lose capital. And sometimes you don't pay enough and you don't get included for months, right? But there's better software that can alleviate a lot of these problems.
Knut, what are you doing over there?
I'm stamping my seed. Everyone tells me I should. That it's good for Bitcoin security and whatnot, and that I should go balls deep into Bitcoin security. So I'm stamping.
No, you don't do it like that, Knut. You don't stamp that seed. You stamp your seed phrase.
What?
Your seed phrase.
Oh, so that's what these things are for. All of this stuff that they sent me. Like, I get it now.
That's exactly right, Knut. And you can get everything you need to stamp your seed phrase at stampseed.com. And be sure to check out our limited edition Everything Divided by 21 Million titanium seed plate. And use code Infinity at checkout for 15% off.
That's fantastic. And it hurts way less.
This show is brought to you by the Bitcoin Advisor, your premier destination for professional Bitcoin management.
Yeah, so if you want help with your Bitcoin inheritance planning or anything like that, you can call us or send us a DM, because we're Bitcoin advisors.
Exactly. They've been serving Bitcoin clients since 2016, and they offer a top-notch Bitcoin concierge service, including collaborative custody and estate planning. We're on the Bitcoin Advisor team ourselves because we believe 100% in what they're doing, and we're happy to tell you more about the Bitcoin Advisor on a call.
So check out the bitcoinadvisor.com or just simply shoot us a DM for some Bitcoin advice. Hey, dear listener, don't forget to like, subscribe, and brush your teeth.
And if you're enjoying the show, the best way you can help us out is spreading the word on your favorite social media platform. Ours is Nostr. The show is going Nostr first, posting the episodes on Nostr 1 day early. And if you'd like to support the show, the easiest way to do that is to send us a zap on Nostr, use a value for value podcasting app to send us a boost, or pick something up from the Bitcoin Infinity store. We appreciate the support.
Yeah, go click like, go click subscribe, and go brush your teeth now.
Well, so I guess another side to this question, because everything you're saying makes total sense from the perspective of it. This stuff is definitely going to happen from a hyper-Bitcoinization side. There's just going to be more demand than there is supply of block space. But I think the issue that we've been exploring a lot lately is that when there are transactions that aren't really being made for the purpose of moving value from one person to another in the form of Satoshis, they're another form of value, subjective value, that is communicated through arbitrary data, or at least some other type of data. Does that change the property of Bitcoin as money? That's essentially, I think, the root of the argument. Anyone talking about
its functionality as money? Yeah.
Exactly, the functionality of Bitcoin as money.
Well, I think there's a couple aspects to this, right? We have, again, a scarce resource, block space, and there's the problem of how do we allocate this block space. And there are very stringent rules on this, right? You cannot have arbitrary data in blocks, right? There needs to be, for example, the transaction structure, right? There needs to be inputs that point to previous outputs, and there need to be outputs, the sum of the inputs, sum of outputs, blah, 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 hashes, transaction headers, all of the stuff needs to be followed in order for this to be considered a valid block. So the Bitcoin developers have, from the very beginning, had a very, I guess, authoritarian regime to allocating these resources, right? Which makes sense, right? If you don't put stringent structure in a protocol, then people just fill it with garbage and every software breaks, right? So it's like a practicality thing that we need to have a very opinionated set of rules. And we need to pick one of them and just do it. Because if we don't pick any, then it won't work, right? And also, if we pick the wrong one, it won't work either, right? I don't know, imagine the rules would have been a broken hashing algorithm, for example, not SHA-256, but SHA-1 or something, right? That's broken, people can create collisions, right? So there could be two transactions that have the exact same transaction ID, breaks the system, right? So if that would have been the set of rules, Bitcoin would have broken. Right? And now also, again, if we allow arbitrary things to be built, then people will just use it as data storage, for example, and just fill it up with megabytes of images. And again, limited amount of resources. If all of it is used for pictures, then none of it can be used for money transfer. And so this is, again, an inherent conflict. And so the tricky thing, though, is now we have this established set of rules in the Bitcoin consensus, and how do we change it, right? And that's the really tricky part of making up man-made rules. Bitcoin is not natural in the sense, right? Humans came up with this shit. This is our creativity that made this happen, right? And so it's not nature-made, right? It's man-made. Of course, men are part of nature and such, so it's a bit wishy-washy here. But ultimately, we made it, we can change it, we can make it better, and we can break it. And that's a really scary position, because I think we all realize that this is quite an important project, and we definitely have it in our power to break this thing. So I hope we do our best effort.
Now, just I guess my interpretation of that is that caution when making changes to Bitcoin is paramount. Would you agree with that?
Well, inaction is an action too, right? And that might be even more dangerous. So there might be critical bugs in the protocol that, if not addressed, will break the system. And potentially they are currently being exploited, right? And so in such a case, we should do our best to fix it as soon as possible. Again, changing the protocol is by design extremely difficult. Satoshi knew that from the very beginning, right? So how exactly we do that? Well, no,
Well, if it's up to the individual miners, which it is, what blocks they want to mine, what transactions they want to include in a block, and it can be fixed that way, a sly roundabout way, if you will.
If we could trust the miners with stuff like this, then we could trust the miners with enforcing the 21 million, right? But we can't, right? We don't rely on anyone. We verify it ourselves.
Yes.
Right? And so the reason why we don't have actual JPEGs in Bitcoin blocks is because your node says no to any block that actually has a JPEG in it, right? Blocks have to have transaction in it. If not, you kick them out, right? So even if there's valid proof of work, right? So proof of work doesn't solve the problem of integrity of the block, right? This has nothing to do with proof of work. In fact, proof of work is one part of the rules of the integrity of the block that is defined, enforced, and verified by the full nodes itself, right? So your full node makes up the full set of rules of what is a valid Bitcoin block or not, right? And you can change it, right? Very easily, in fact.
Yeah.
Just the question is, will you convince others to use the same changes that you applied? And there's many millions of people using this thing now. It's quite hard to get people on a consensus for such drastic things, especially to ensure that like no one else is still using the old rules that are currently valid, right? Like specifically, if you want to get rid of inscriptions, like that's certainly a hard fork, right? Like Taproot transactions are currently valid, right? And if we make these Taproot transactions in the future invalid, that's a hard fork, right?
Yeah.
So like technically speaking, like it's not that nobody would want to have a hard fork. It would be great to hard fork Bitcoin. We could clean so much stuff. It's just a practical reality that breaking the hard fork use of a running protocol is extremely difficult and arguably like unethical, right? Because people have signed up to the previous system, right? And built businesses and, stored their money in these types of scripts. If we now make them unspendable, like, what is that? No?
Yeah, so when it comes to mining, I mean, there's and minor incentives, like the thing we talked about before about under the table payments to big mining pools. To me, the obvious fix to this problem is to just make get it into the brains of the hash salesman that they ought not be mere hash salesmen, but actual miners and know what block they're mining on. Because I think the ethos among the individual miners is better than maybe these bigger pools that might not be as concerned with the longevity of the Bitcoin experiment, but more fiat minded and wanting a quick buck now rather than save the system in the long run. So right now it feels like we're trusting these bigger entities to have as much of a disincentive to destroy Bitcoin so that they won't. But it's tricky, like it's a gray zone, right? What's your thoughts?
I think Satoshi's genius in designing the Bitcoin protocol was that he did his best to separate different tasks that need to be done in the system into different like conceptual entities, and then to ensure that each of these aspects is distributed as widely as possible. And this is ultimately what it means that Bitcoin is decentralized. Right? There is not one person that defines the set of rules, for example, or one person that writes the candidate block, right? Or one person that provides the proof of work for the candidate block, or one person that provides the signature for each transaction, right? Each of these things is distributed, and in the ideal case, in the original Bitcoin client, to every user, right? Like the Bitcoin software in 2009 was mining by default for everyone, right? So literally the entire stack of the operation was at 100% of the users, right? There was no non-validating, non-mining users in the beginning, right? We had perfect decentralization, so to say, right? And then if efficiencies kick in and economies of scale and division of labor, and we start to optimize each of these things kind of on its own and split it out into different, specialized entities, so to say, right? And if you specialize on being the best hasher that you could possibly be, right? You just give up on like being the best block candidate creator that you could possibly be, right? Because if you do the one thing that you're marginally better at and focus all your attention on that, you will be the most profitable, right? That's the division of labor, basically. So yes, it is an issue, and Bitcoin would be better off if we further distribute the risk and responsibility of each of these tasks to as many people as possible. And I think we've done a really good job, for example, of distributing the ownership of private keys. And like, there's, I don't know, many millions of private key holders on the Bitcoin blockchain, right? So that's great. And we have probably done this as well with hashers, right? There's a decent amount of quite large independent hashing institutions, right? Not so well with mining pools and actual block candidate creation. Like, that's pretty bad. Like, there's like 2 or 3 of them, so that's scary as fuck. Right there, we've utterly failed, and we've made Bitcoin way worse than it was before. Like in this one metric of resilience, of decentralization, of distribution of risks, we made it a lot more efficient, but we made it much more vulnerable to attack, and that is a problem. Thankfully, a lot of people are working on fixing it. It's a really difficult problem, right? It's not that like there's some malicious attempt of trying to break it. I mean, maybe there is, but the more likely answer is just bloody difficult computer science, and it just needs an insane amount of research and development before we will have tools that are even coming close to being actually adequate. Right? I'm not praising Satoshi's 2009 code as being perfect, because it was a pile of shit, right? And you could break it in a million ways. So we've improved a lot, but we're very far from done. And because just to some extent, the realities of the difficulty of the situation have caught on much faster than our ability to solve these.
Yeah, I mean, the problems that are currently existent in Bitcoin and that now we're at Nostriga today and talking about Nostr, this sort of related communication layer in relation to Bitcoin. You mentioned at the very beginning, freedom tech. So when we last talked to you, you were focusing on Wasabi Wallet, and now obviously that project has just been made open source, essentially. And so my question to you on that is, what are you focusing on in terms of freedom tech now?
Well, Nostr is definitely a highlight, right? Nostr is just incredibly cool. And it's so wild to think that Nostr is like 2 years old. Like, it's not old, but look at the amount of stuff that we've built in this short time frame. Like, how fucking powerful are we? It's incredible, right? If we get our act together and actually build on like such an open protocol and get people excited about it and people using it, like, it doesn't take us long to fundamentally change the pattern of speech on this planet. Like, wow, that's incredible. Like, we did that. That's wild. And we're just getting started, right? Like, think about where Nostr is going to be in 5 years. It will be wild, absolutely insane. So that's very bullish and very encouraging. And it's super exciting to work at such an early stage in the protocol, because there's so many obvious improvements. There's so many obvious use cases. There's so many low-hanging fruits of how we can make it even better than it currently is, right? So we have something that's already great, and we know a million ways on how we can make it even better, right? And you can be part of making a meaningful improvement in getting this to like an exponential blow-off of awesomeness.
Meaningful improvement in improvement of humanity, really.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, that's why freedom tech is so exhilarating to work at, because like we're ending slavery. That's kind of a big deal, you know?
Yeah, should have been done at least 300 years ago.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing. And actually, so a couple of things here. First of all, we've talked about this a little bit, how Nostr seems like it's the playground that people wanted as an alternative to Bitcoin. In other words, people who went and started making shitcoins were basically just wanting a playground to do all this stuff.
Yeah.
But now is Nostr basically the place where people can do that and channel their energies in a way that isn't going to break money?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So I'm very bullish on a lot of these use cases. And one other area that currently interests me a lot is just the zero knowledge cryptography. It's wild what's possible. It's absolutely wild. Within the last 5 years or so, the theory has developed. And again, a lot of shitcoin projects putting zero knowledge proofs on blockchains and such. And I'm not quite convinced that we actually need a blockchain for that. I think relays are just fine. And so I'm quite bullish on having actual zero knowledge proofs much more integrated in Nostr clients. Like, you can do amazing things with this. Like, for example, anonymous web of trust, right? You could prove to me under an ephemeral anonymous identity, right, that you are in fact on my follower list. Like, I'm following you, but I don't know who you are, right? So these types of things are trivial with zero knowledge stuff. And we don't have any size constraints or computation constraints in Nostr, because it is not a global consensus system. Only the people who are interested in this proof actually have to like download it and verify it and such. So I think we can do a lot of amazing stuff here. I still have to kind of dig deeper in this rabbit hole, but it seems pretty obvious wins here.
Yeah, and do you think the driving these 180 IQ young developers into Nostr instead of shitcoin development is like moving them to think more of what they should rather than what they could? Because I think that's sort of the main problem with this nerdy set of shitcoin developers, is that I could do this if I just do this, and they focus on what they can do rather than what they should do. And is Nostr like changing the direction of that? Are people thinking more of ethical things while developing on this than
I hope
other
so.
things?
But I mean, it's a big claim, right? That like a piece of tech can
It's a bit of hopium.
improve the morality of people. It's definitely a big claim, but it seems true. Like, if you think about it in Bitcoin, like probably each of us, our level of morality before we discovered Bitcoin and what it is now, and our understanding of morality has substantially, like insanely improved, right? And I'm not sure if it would have happened, at least to this extent, without being exposed to the Bitcoin technology. And so, and Bitcoin is just money, you know, like humans do a lot more than buy stuff, you know, like sure, money is incredibly important, but it's far from it's far from everything of the human experience. And I think Nostr will do a lot of the other stuff. And Nostr has this freedom mindset embedded into the protocol, just as Bitcoin has. And so I'm extremely bullish on seeing the people who get exposed to Nostr and what it does to them in the long run.
So what happens first, Hypernostrification or Hyperbitcoinization? And does
both
one lead
at the same time.
Does one lead to the other?
No, there's definitely synergies here, right? And yes, one leads to the other. I met a bunch of people who got interested into Nostr first and then used Bitcoin for the first time. It's a very common theme, actually. Again, because like social, like think of the like average screen time of people, right? How much is on social media and how much is in their banking application? Like,
That's one way of putting it, for sure.
you
Yeah.
know? I think Nostr is going to be way bigger than Bitcoin in the improvement of the human condition.
Then again, every time you press the like button or the retweet button or whatever on your social media app, even the legacy system, you are providing someone with some value. That's why your account is valuable to Facebooks and the Twitters of the world. There is a value thing embedded into everything you do on the internet. Yeah.
It's just you don't get a tradable good.
No,
But you cannot sell the like to someone else.
No, not at this point.
But you know,
well,
Telegram did that actually. I just saw. They have now a star emoji. If you send the star emoji, you can send the star emoji back to the company and they will give you money. So voila, it's basically a shitcoin, but it's a star.
Well, so is it more important to fix money or the other stuff?
Well, that's a big one. Both, again. Because like money is only half of every transaction. Right? And so like maybe the earlier example of the marketplace for Bitcoin block space is perfect, because why did Satoshi include the marketplace, the other stuff, together with the money? Because it was kind of essential, right? You need to have both at the same time in order to live, right? You need to speak, you need to advertise your products, you need to negotiate with the customers, right? You need to convince them of the value that you will provide to them. And then you need to receive the money and tell them that you've received it, and ultimately hand over the goods, right? So there's a lot of human interaction into every trade. And the money aspect is just like one small part of this long interactive chain of protocol, basically. So yeah, I think we need both at the same time. And we're just discovering upgrades to each of them as we move along. But this has always been in synergy. Like the internet is way older than Bitcoin, right? So arguably we need the other stuff first, right? We needed like 20, 30 years of other stuff before we could actually come up with the money.
So fix the money, fix the world goes both ways then. Fix the world and you fix the money.
No, but seriously, we actually talked about this in that maybe an analogy to that the internet needed to develop in a centralized way, because literally the hardware and everything, the architecture, the client server model was literally a centralized and centralizing model, and that needed to exist first. But then the analogy is that gold was centralized naturally, in the sense that physically, the physical constraints of gold made it so that it naturally centralized into banks, and then fiat solved that problem to sort of decentralize it, but it broke everything. So now the mechanism of fixing the money and decentralizing the money was Bitcoin. But the corollary for decentralizing the communication is Nostr. So both things have kind of happened in a parallel. That's what we were discussing. So
that is the alarm telling me I should go on stage.
Oh, okay.
Well, but I still have a couple minutes, so we'll wrap it up.
Where can't we find you online, Max Hillebrand? Because you can't be found online, can you?
Well, on Nostr for sure. max@towardsliberty.com. You can send me mail, notes, and sats to that, which is, by the way, crazy, right? That we can have like this unique identifier to get like all of your needs settled is wild. And yeah, like check out Lodging of Wayfaring Men. That's, I guess, the main shill of this video. And I made the audiobook for it. It's on a podcast. The podcast is by the author, Paul Rosenberg, and it's called Parallel Society. Right, so check that out. Right now we've released like the first episode, first chapter, the others will come shortly thereafter.
Fantastic.
And the other book recommendation I should highlight, which you haven't mentioned yet, is Crypto Economics by Eric Voskuil.
Oh yeah.
Most of what I said here was very much inspired by that book. He has the most rigorous understanding of Bitcoin. It's by far the best Bitcoin book. Sorry, Knut, but you have no chance. So I also did the audiobook for that. Search for Crypto Economics in your podcast.
It's not the best audiobook, though.
It's not. When you have
back at you.
When you have to read tables of math formulas,
exactly.
It's starting to fall apart. But there's a lot of verbal logic in the book that goes very well. Just get the free PDF for the actual graphs and stuff.
And keep using Wasabi and fire up your own coordinators and whatnot, right?
Okay, we'll let you go. Max, always a pleasure. Thanks a lot. Guys. This has been the Bitcoin Infinity Show. Thanks for listening. I get on stage, Max. We don't want to make you late.
Go buy the book. It's almost as good as Eric's.
That's not what I said.
All right, that's it.